everyone, my name is Natalie. I'm the Student Wellbeing Manager here at the University of London. And I'm going to be talking today about having a whole university approach to student wellbeing at the University of London. Just to note, I do integrate Menti with my slides if you're familiar, so you might want to get your phones out ready. Because we are kind of a bit short time, mainly using it as a tool for you to kind of reflect, I guess, on your own kind of views and what's coming up in the presentation. But I like to have a bit of interactivity in this. And also just to mention, it's University Mental Health Day, so this is very topical for today. So firstly, I wanted to ask you all, what do you associate with wellbeing? What words do you associate with wellbeing? Just to get a sense of, I guess, the diversity in the room and what your thoughts are. So you can scan the QR code. If I can move that out of the way. Have we done that? Okay. Or you can go to menti.com and use the code. I'm seeing some come through here, which is really great. I'm seeing things like balance, happiness, care, peace, coping, mental health, self-care. Yeah, great. Lots of different words coming through, so please keep them coming. And I suppose the purpose of this is to show, I guess, the variety of definitions that we have with wellbeing and how it varies based on our own frame of reference. So this will be things like our cultural context and our identity influence how we view wellbeing. On the left is our definition of wellbeing from the University of London perspective, but also in a way it's quite Eurocentric. And on the right is some research that was conducted by one of our teaching centres in Pakistan to explore how students in Pakistan view wellbeing. And they came up with words like realisation of potential, productivity, resilience, citizenship, and learning experience, all of which we found quite closely connected with academic performance. To add to the context, I suppose, of how diverse our student community is, I don't know how much you know, but I'm covering the basics. We've got 40,000 students worldwide, covering over 190 countries, with our biggest cohorts in Pakistan and Singapore. And we work with 180 different teaching centres around the world as well. And we have a really wide reach in terms of our wellbeing side of things. So on social media, we've reached over 400,000 in the last 4 months. And over 3,500 students use our Talk Campus platform, which is a mental health app and peer support platform too. So how do we take a whole university approach when the learning community is so diverse and widespread? And I propose that it's by creating a culture of care. And we can focus on this by looking at best practice, at localised support and student services. But what does it mean to create a culture of care? So I've stolen this from the University Mental Health Charter. You might be familiar, we're programme members. And they say that a university is like an ecosystem where one part impacts the other. So that's something that I really had at the forefront of my mind when thinking about a culture of care. So starting by thinking about the challenges that we're facing, as it is such a globally distributed online and distance learning community. It's the same QR code as last time, so you'll find that it will pop up now for you if you want to have a go at thinking about the key challenges that we might face. I'll present the ones that I've come up with. Attitudes towards mental health vary significantly across the world, I'm sure as you can imagine. Approaches to how we support those who are experiencing mental health issues vary a lot, so we take a more individualistic approach in the West versus in other areas of the world where it's more community-based. There's limitations in local services, which can be really difficult if we need to refer students to receive more crisis support. And as online and distance learners, they can feel quite isolated and have a sense of disconnection as well from the university. And I'm seeing some come through as well in terms of cultural sensitivities, and considering different time zones. Yeah, not knowing how students are feeling as well. Some really great views there. So now we're aware of the different barriers that we might face. The next part was to identify some gaps in our service in where we're not kind of addressing those barriers. And my first thought was, what role does staff play in creating a culture of care? And I found that there was a tendency for staff to feel quite overwhelmed, both in terms of the quantity of inquiries that were coming through, but also in terms of the content and not knowing how to cope with when students were disclosing mental health issues. James Hutchinson from the University of Exeter suggests that we use compassionate communication to address this. The underlying principle is that what we say and how we say it matters. And this is about ensuring that we're giving students the chance to feel optimistic about their student experience. And research into this area has shown that students are 30% more likely to access help, attend classes, feel more hopeful, continue their studies, and have a better perception of the institution. So when we're looking at student success and retention, this really matters. So to introduce compassionate communication to the university, looked at what resources we could use to equip staff with the right tools. The idea of this is to empower staff to use this knowledge when they're supporting students in different situations. So we used a see it, say it signpost methodology, giving staff the knowledge they need to spot the warning signs that are presented by students, to respond appropriately, and to escalate to the relevant services as well. This pack also includes the discussion of how to discuss suicide in a culturally sensitive way as well. As you may be aware, suicide is illegal in some countries, and so that we have to take consideration that that's the cultural context we're working with our students in. As a result of this, we saw a 150% increase in the student wellbeing caseload, which may sound bad, I guess, but to me, this shows that this has been a real success because more students are accessing our services than were before, and more students are being referred by staff as well than before. So we're picking up those cases we wouldn't have found otherwise. But all this training may be very well, but we need to embed this in the day-to-day as well. So one way in which we do this is through communities of practice. The underlying idea of this is that student wellbeing is everyone's responsibility, not just that of the wellbeing team. So I created a wellbeing champion network across the worldwide department with internal staff. And the aim of this was to look at best practice when it comes to responding to students, and we look at real life scenarios and discuss them together as a network. We collaborate to address gaps that we notice in our service, and we find new opportunities to support students to feel optimistic about their student experience. And you can see some quotes from wellbeing champions saying that personal responses to student wellbeing matters, that they've learned that they have a greater understanding of the current issues that impact student wellbeing, and that they understand now that wellbeing is embedded in everything that we do, and this network is really able to influence university culture too. As we've taken a three-step approach to this is our communication strategy, compassionate communication strategy. First, starting off with a learning element, so really kind of building that foundational knowledge across staff. That's through training and understanding student wellbeing issues and the services that we offer. And then taking action with that. So, for example, we embedded wellbeing by including signposting in our templates, addressing that challenge of staff feeling quite overwhelmed when dealing with inquiries. And now we're at a growth stage, which is really exciting because there are lots of new kind of initiatives and innovative projects that are coming out as a result of this. So, for example, we created a resource pack for prospective students So that's thinking about letting students know before they start university about the wellbeing services available, so that they will more easily find that when they need it, rather than trying to figure it out in a moment of need. So we found a gap in our student support. We've implemented a compassionate communication strategy by introducing resources for staff, empowering staff to use this in supporting students, and sustaining this through communities of practice. So this is kind of embedding wellbeing and ensuring that we are continuing to grow as well. Another gap is addressing the challenge of cultural differences in attitudes towards mental health and well-being. So how do you think that we can address this gap as an international university? So I'll leave that up there as you can have a think a little bit about that. And what we're kind of focused on here is the global consistency and the local relevance, and tying those two together. We know that local support varies so much across our teaching centres. There wasn't any mandatory support that we required teaching centres to give students when they signed up with us. So I created a mental health and wellbeing policy to introduce a minimum standard for teaching centres and a guide for staff to use when students are presenting with issues. So that includes, and I know it's tiny writing, but just to give you an idea, there's a risk matrix and escalation protocols. And essentially, staff can use this to assess the severity of the wellbeing issue that the student's presenting with, and then take the appropriate steps afterwards. So it really simplifies it and ensures that we're not kind of, there's less room for judgment, I suppose, or kind of personal sway to come into that if it's really, really clearly set out. But this is only one half of the story. The other half is making sure that it's locally relevant as well. So in the same way that I did for internal staff, we also have a wellbeing champion network with our teaching centres around the world. And this has been really successful. It means that we are working with those staff, empowering them to use those resources that I've just shared with you in a way that they feel is relevant to their students. Having an awareness of their cultural context and the specific barriers their students might face, they can address that in a way that they feel is appropriate. And also it allows for a closer working relationship and feedback to go both ways. So they can feed back to us about gaps in our service and where we can improve to make sure that we are delivering services that are relevant to students around the world. So to give you some examples, the British University Vietnam has started a peer support programme. They only had, well, and still only have, 2 wellbeing staff for 2,000 students, so they were very stretched. And what they decided to do was train students a group of students to become a listening buddy, so teaching them active listening skills, using the peer support resources that we had to do that. And then they created a Pour Your Heart Out form for students who needed help to share how they were feeling and to be matched with a listening buddy. Another example is with the London College of Legal Studies in Bangladesh. They ran a poster competition for World Mental Health Day. And this was run by Tarsin Salim, who I've linked to a blog post if these slides are shared afterwards. And this was a real chance for students to reflect on their own well-being, for us to find out how they viewed well-being and what kind of self-care activities they did. And also to engage them more with our services and let them know what's available to them as well. So there's how do we do this centrally? Because this is all kind of happening in those teaching centres around the world, but obviously we need to make sure that our central services are also accessible and relevant to those students. So that's another question for you if you wanted to have a think about that. We make sure that we have lots of opportunities for peer support. That's been a running theme, and I will talk more about that. But as a kind of highlight, we have a Talk Campus app, which is a peer support platform. where students can talk anonymously with other students. We have a student ambassador network, a Discord server, and run safe spaces as well for students. We also make sure that our services, especially the crisis services, are available 24/7 because we have to account for those different time zones. And the crisis helplines are available to anyone around the world. And the clinicians that answer the phone are offering support in 26 different languages as well. So students can most likely speak to someone who speaks their first language too. They also have access to book an appointment with the Wellbeing team. We know that the sense of disconnection online distance learners face can be detrimental to their wellbeing. So as well as offering support over email, they can book face-to-face appointments with us, mainly over video call. But on the off chance they are in London, they can also meet us face-to-face in person. And we also make sure that we offer a variety of support. So we've got the Wellbeing Hub, which has resources they can look at independently. We've got counselling, and then safe spaces if they want kind of more interaction with students. And this is where they can connect with other students from who share an identity with a specific group. So for example, LGBTQ+. 2 minutes, okay. That's going to be a challenge. So we use a prevention and early intervention strategy. Considering that our students are so spread out, we need to think about how we can empower students to use resources that they can tailor for themselves. Like I said, we offer lots of different crisis support, so I won't go into that in more detail. And then this is the peer support. So interesting with our worldwide audience that our students are above the community average in terms of their interest in offering support to their peers as opposed to receiving help. So off the back of that, we've developed webinars and volunteering opportunities where students can get more opportunities to offer that peer support. So, in conclusion, it's really essential to address the needs of staff, students, global and local, in creating a culture of care. And each approach is twofold, so empowering staff and then sustaining with the resources, sustaining this through communities of practice, empowering our teaching centre staff with the policy, and sustaining this through the Wellbeing Champion Network, and empowering our students with the resources and sustaining this through the peer and community-based support. So this is really kind of what we need to create a sustainable strategy. A whole university approach must include both adequately resourced, effective and accessible mental health services and proactive interventions made with both staff and student needs in mind, and especially for our online distance learners with prevention and early intervention strategies. And it must provide an environment and culture that reduces poor mental health, as well as supporting good mental health and facilitating staff and students to develop insight, understanding and skills to manage and maintain their own well-being in the context they're in. This requires a wider culture of care that puts student well-being at the forefront across the university. Thank you.